Hey everybody, I just finished the new Sayaka Murata book, Vanishing World. When I say new, it's not that new. It actually was published in Japan in 2015 and is just making its way to the United States in April of 2025. So it'll be out in several months from now. But I was lucky enough to get an advance copy from Grove Press, so thank you very much. And I'm super excited to talk about the book and Sayaka Murata just in general. Sayaka Murata is a Japanese author who's written books such as Convenience Store Woman, Earthlings, and Life Ceremony. I've read Convenience Store Woman and Earthlings, and I really liked both of those books. Their stories are really interesting because they are, you could kind of boil it down to being about people that don't fit into society. I don't mean that in like a Joker type of like society kind of way. I just mean like the characters in these books aren't like, like Joker trying to like get revenge on anyone or anything like that. It's more that the thoughts and behaviors that they have are either frowned upon or weird people out, or frankly in some cases are just morally reprehensible. But the way that these people act in her books is like very sincere. It's not coming from a place of like provocation or trying to get a rise out of somebody or like being edgy. So when I say like these books are about people who don't fit into society, please don't conjure up images of like mall ninja people or Joker or anything like that, because it's like not the vibe at all. Convenience Store Woman was the first book I ever read by her, and it follows a woman who's been working in a convenience store for 18 years, and her whole identity is kind of wrapped up in working at this convenience store. I won't give too much away, but she ends up entering into a relationship with this dude who is like questionable at best, basically just to like put on the facade that she's living a normal life and that she's like in a relationship and has a husband and whatever else, because she feels like that's what the rest of the people in her life want to see from her, even though like she's kind of just going through the motions with it. Like her real identity and the thing she likes to do is work at that convenience store. It's not explicitly stated in the book, but the character in that story is like pretty strongly autistically coded. And so there is like a reading of that book or an interpretation that you could do based around the character being that way. With that said, I'm not an expert. I can't diagnose anybody, and this is a character in a fictional world. And as far as I know, like Sayaka Murata hasn't explicitly stated that this character is autistic. So that's just my own interpretation of it. Take it or leave it. Now with Earthlings, it's hard to talk about that book because I'm not going to say much about Earthlings, only because I think you should read it if you like a certain type of book. I'm not recommending this book to absolutely everyone, because I feel like there's some people who are going to read it and hate it and then think I'm a total weirdo for recommending it. But Earthlings left such a strong impression on me, even though I think at the time I don't think I actually liked the book very much. Like I think I gave it 3 stars on Goodreads, because whatever that means. But the book just provoked such like a visceral physical reaction in me that like I haven't forgotten about it since I read it. Like I don't think I've ever read a book that's made me want to like puke before, that like literally I could feel myself like, oh god. With that said, I don't really read a whole lot of like horror books or anything like that, so I'm sure this could be like baby shit compared to people who are reading like really awful stuff all the time. But looking back on it, I really liked Earthlings. That book also deals with people who are living in a way that is going against the grain of everything around them. In this case, much more like morally reprehensible than the woman in Convenience Store Woman. So yeah, definitely a trigger warning on that book for a lot of things. I would maybe do your own research before you start that book, but incredibly well done, and definitely something that like proved to me that Sayaka Murata has this skill in talking about like taboo issues and writing characters that are like pretty unlikable but like understandable because you're getting it through their perspective. And yeah, even though like at the time I wasn't super thrilled with Earthlings, immediately I was like, oh, like whatever this lady writes, I will check out probably in perpetuity because of how interesting her stuff is. This new book, Vanishing World, like I said, predates Convenience Store Woman. I believe this came out in 2015 in Japan, and Convenience Store Woman came out the year after. In a similar fashion to Convenience Store Woman and Earthlings, this book deals with somebody who just kind of doesn't fit in, but with kind of like a sci-fi twist this time. I'm not going to get into full spoilers with the book, but just to give you a general premise of what it's about. This book exists in an alternate future where the role of like sex in society has changed completely. Essentially, like because of a war that is alluded to and the absence of men in society for a decent amount of time. It's not like they're completely gone, but like, you know, the men went away to war, the women are left at home. Essentially, artificial insemination has become commonplace for human reproduction. So the idea of two human beings actually like having sex with each other is considered like old-fashioned in a way, and is something that like, I wouldn't say it's like frowned upon, but it's something where if someone were to find out you were doing it, they'd kind of like give you a side eye, like, why? Because of this change in society, people's relationships to their own sexuality has changed. So, for instance, people still get married in this world, but your husband or your wife would be considered like a family member, almost in the way that like your brother or sister would be a family member. So the thought of having sex with that person is like crazy and is taboo for the people in this society. Like the idea that you would have sex with your wife is like, oh, gross. It's not like people don't have sexual urges at all, but those sexual urges are sort of placed outside of the marriage. So in some cases, you have people who are having extramarital relationships with other people, which in its weird own fucked up way, this book is kind of like a polyamory type of thing. So, you know, you might have a husband or wife, but you don't have sex with them, but you will have sex with like a girlfriend or a boyfriend outside of the marriage. The other thing that happens in this book is that often from a young age, it is pretty commonplace for people to start having like sexual feelings and feelings of attachment to characters on TV, including like cartoon characters. And, you know, to sort of like alleviate these sexual feelings, masturbation is kind of like the way to go. So people in this society kind of run the gamut from like not having any sexual feelings at all to, yes, I have sexual feelings, but they are only for people I see on TV. There's people who have sexual feelings but don't participate in those feelings like in their marriage or in their relationship. And then kind of all the way over on the other side of the spectrum, which, you know, to us would be considered normal, is people who like actually do want to have sexual relations with their loved ones. So it's really bizarre. And in some ways, this book is different than like Convenience Store Woman or Earthlings in that, like, in those books, the characters themselves are acting in ways that are different from how like our current society views things and like the taboos that exist there. Whereas in this book, the main character kind of has urges that are like very similar to what we would have, but those urges are in contrast to society that has changed and has sort of like moved on from how we view sex in our society. Much like the other two books, there is some physically gross stuff in this book. I wouldn't say it's quite as gross as Earthlings, but there is some questionable, morally reprehensible behavior going on from the main character, and other characters in the book too. So again, if you're squeamish, if you don't want to read something that's gonna like gross you out and you have a hard time reading books about like people that are bad people, at least, you know, in normal circumstances, maybe this book isn't for you. However, if you can get past that, like if you can kind of deal with the squeamishness, if you can sort of accept that all these actions are taking place in a world where our preconceptions about sex and relationships are just out the window, essentially, I think this book is like a really fascinating deconstruction of those ideas. And it's also a really easy read. Like, I think I read this whole thing in like 3 hours in the past couple days. So it's super easy to get through. It's super easy to read. Like, the language isn't super complicated. So if you're looking for something new, try it out. It might not be your thing at all. This book doesn't come out for quite a while. Like I said, it comes out in April 2025. It's currently December 2024. So you have plenty of time to get to Convenience Store Woman or Earthlings or Life Ceremony, which I haven't read. So yeah, maybe test it out first before this one comes up. If you're someone who likes Haruki Murakami, which I know a lot of the people in my subscriber base really do like him, and you're looking to get into other Japanese authors, especially ones that are like currently working and like relevant in today's culture, I highly recommend you try out some Sayaka Murata. I've read a decent amount of other Japanese authors like since I've gotten into Haruki Murakami, and she's by far one of the authors that I think about the most, or whose work has like affected me in a way that was memorable. I've also spent like at least half the year, probably most of this past year, reading like fantasy books and epic fantasy and just these kind of like door stoppers with a lot of like lore and world building. And so to kind of almost like go back to my roots, to read like a weird little Japanese book that takes 3 hours to read and makes you feel fucking weird, hit the spot. It was really great. I've been waffling in my head about giving this like 4 stars or 5 stars. I kind of need to let it sit a little bit longer to give it that 5 stars. But with that said, like, I had such a fun time reading this book, and it went by so quickly. You know, some books, like, even though I love them, they can be kind of a chore to get to. And this was not the case at all. Like, I read, like, I think the first 2/3 of this book on Thursday night, went to work, wished I was reading it the entire time I was there, came home, finished it. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I'm going to be thinking about this one for quite a while. So 4 stars for now, maybe 5 stars in the future. We'll see. Frankly, I don't even like rating books. I don't like doing it on Letterboxd. I don't like doing it on Goodreads. Like, books are just books. Art is just art. It's all subjective. I either liked it or I didn't. Or maybe it was somewhere in between. So, you know, take my star ratings if you follow me on Goodreads with kind of a grain of salt. I'm sort of doing that begrudgingly. Thank you again to the publisher for letting me get my hands on this thing before it comes out. This was a really fun read. Yeah, highly recommend it. But again, take that recommendation with some nuance. There's a good chance you might hate this fucking book, and that's okay. But when it comes out, or if you happen to get a copy of it before it comes out, let me know what you think. There's certainly a lot to talk about. So yeah, thanks for watching, as always. I'll be back next week with a like wrap-up video for 2024, just talking about all my favorite things that I read and watched and all that. So keep an eye out for that. Yeah, otherwise, Happy New Year, and see you in 2025. Bye-bye.